All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're going to try and deconstruct a really complex and, let's be honest, often misunderstood topic, Islamophobia. And by the end of this, we're going to land on a pretty important question that involves every single one of us. What would you do?
But before we get into all that, I want to start with a question for you. Seriously, just take a second. When you hear the word Muslim or the word Islam, what's the very first thing that pops into your head? There's no right or wrong answer here. This is just about figuring out our own starting points.
Because those ideas, whatever just came to mind for you, they all come from somewhere, right? For some people, it's about religious traditions like prayer. Or maybe you remember learning about the 5 pillars in history class. For others, it's images we see all the time on TV and in movies, like women wearing hijabs, or, unfortunately, some pretty negative stereotypes. And of course, for many, it comes from personal connections, friends who are Muslim, and who share that sense of peace and community. All of these things shape how we see the world.
Okay, so to really get how these perceptions can have a real impact, we kind of need to be on the same page with our vocabulary. So let's decode a few key concepts first.
First up, stereotype. This is a big one. You can think of it like a mental shortcut, an oversimplified idea about an entire group of people. And the example here is perfect, assuming all Muslims are Arab. It's a really common thought, but the reality is the huge majority of Muslims worldwide are not Arab. That's a classic stereotype in action.
Now, here's where it gets interesting. A stereotype can evolve. When you attach a negative feeling to that oversimplified belief, it becomes prejudice. So it's not just a thought anymore, it's a negative attitude. You're moving from a simple generalization to actually distrusting someone because they're Muslim. See the shift? That's the move from stereotype to prejudice.
And that brings us to the final piece of the puzzle, discrimination. And this is the critical difference, because this is when that internal attitude, that prejudice, turns into an external action. It's unfair treatment, plain and simple. Denying a woman a job because she wears a hijab isn't just a bad thought. It's a harmful act that has very real consequences. So that's the chain reaction we have to get. Stereotype to prejudice to discrimination.
Now, seeing these definitions on a slide is one thing. But what does this stuff actually look like in the real world? For that, let's check out a really fascinating and kind of revealing social experiment. So the setup was simple, but wow, was it powerful. The TV show What Would You Do went to a bakery in Texas, they set up a bunch of hidden cameras, and then they staged this scene of really blatant discrimination, all to see how ordinary people would react. So in the experiment, an actor playing a bakery clerk starts refusing to serve another actor, a woman wearing a hijab. But he didn't just refuse her, he started yelling insults, including this just shocking line, "Get back on the camel." I mean, it's just a raw, unfiltered example of prejudice in action, all built on these awful stereotypes.
But the clerk wasn't the only one on camera. When another customer was asked about what was happening, his response was just as revealing. He actually justified what the clerk was doing, saying, business owners should be able to choose who they serve. He basically just normalized the discrimination he literally just saw happen.
And his reaction pretty much sums up what the cameras caught all day. So what did most people do? Absolutely nothing. The vast majority of customers just pretended it wasn't happening. A few, like the guy we just heard from, actually supported the clerk, and only a very, very small handful of people actually stepped in to help the woman. It's a powerful and kind of uncomfortable look at what happens when people stay silent.
That bakery, that was a small-scale experiment. But the attitudes we saw there, they don't just stay in one little bakery. They escalate, and they end up making headlines all over the world.
So, let's start in the United Kingdom, where a bunch of reports have been painting a pretty worrying picture.
Over in the UK, we're seeing that same chain reaction play out. We're talking about acts of discrimination like mosques being vandalized with hate symbols, public prejudice showing up as graffiti, and Muslim women being targeted with awful name-calling. These aren't just random acts, they're part of a pattern.
And that same pattern of public hostility, it's happening right across the Atlantic here in the United States.
From Texas all the way to California, mosques have been tagged with anti-Muslim graffiti. And in San Francisco, during Eid celebrations, a time that's supposed to be about joy and community, worshipers were verbally attacked with hateful slurs. It just goes to show how this kind of prejudice can invade even the most sacred of spaces.
And sometimes these acts of hate escalate to the most tragic outcome you can imagine. And that brings us to a report from France. Inside a mosque, a man was stabbed to death. The authorities officially called the attack Islamophobic. The suspect wasn't hiding his motives. He was reportedly shouting insults about Allah while he was doing it. This is it. This is the ultimate, horrifying consequence of unchecked hatred, the kind that starts with a simple stereotype.
Seeing all of this, it can feel really overwhelming, but it brings us right back to the question we started with. It's so easy to judge the people in that bakery, right? But the real challenge is to turn that question on ourselves. What would we do? And even more importantly, what can we do?
The most important thing to remember here is that we aren't powerless. Being an ally really just comes down to a few clear actions. You can speak up, and I don't mean start a huge fight. Just calmly explain why what someone said or did is hurtful. You can support the person being targeted. Seriously, just standing next to them can make a world of difference. There's also the work we do on our own, educating ourselves to break down our own biases. And finally, when it's safe, report the behavior to someone in charge. Taking action is how we break the cycle.
And that brings us to our final thought. After looking at where our ideas come from, how they can lead to real harm, and what we can actually do about it, I want to leave you with one last question to think about. What's one stereotype that was challenged for you today? Because holding on to that might just be the most powerful first step you can take.